question. You can watch us on Global Player. Joining me on the panel are the Conservative MP Ben Everitt. He's MP for Milton Keynes North. Dhesi, Shadow Rail Minister and Labour MP for Slough. He's just arrived. He's been busy voting, I think, but he'll be with us in just 1 second. Joe Tanner is a political commentator, and Sunny Hundal is Deputy Opinion Editor at The Independent. They're here to take your calls. The number to call, 0345 6060 973.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Now, our first question is going to be from David in Enfield on Rwanda. But I'm going to read out a tweet from Incorrigible FCA, who's just said this. Iain Dale just told LBC listeners that anyone who thinks trafficking black and brown refugees to Rwanda is racist is deluded, frankly. And that's in quotes. I said exactly the opposite during the whole of the last hour. So I don't know what you were listening to, but it wasn't me. David, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Okay, my question is, does the panel agree with Prince Charles that the transport of vulnerable asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing is, quote, appalling?
So the question is, does the panel agree with Prince Charles that the Rwanda scheme is appalling? Ben Everitt.
Thanks, Iain. Hi, David. Thanks for the question. So this government was elected to sort out our asylum system. The asylum system is broken. This is the path to fixing it. We are implementing a policy that people voted for.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. This wasn't a policy in the last manifesto.
Well, we said we'd fix it, and this is fixing it. We shouldn't forget that we are a welcoming, kind-hearted country. But this is government that takes big decisions. We take tough decisions for the long term, and nobody would deny that we didn't need to fix the asylum system. In particular, where the Nationality and Borders Bill applies is to people entering this country illegally, people who are being trafficked, people who are outside of the other asylum routes that we have to this country. We take on a load of refugees, lots and lots, as we've witnessed from the Afghans, the Ukrainians, the Syrians, the British nationals overseas, the Hong Kongers that we've welcomed.
But we're sending the Syrians to Rwanda, apparently.
So what we're trying to do is get a grip of the situation. The worst possible thing, the most immoral thing we could do would be to do nothing and to not solve this problem and not address this issue.
Jerking your knee to a sort of something must be done idea is almost as bad, isn't it? Because the logic of this policy is supposedly that it will deter people from risking their own lives by crossing the channel. Is that not right?
Ultimately, that's exactly
How is sending 100 people at a time to Rwanda, because the accommodation there will only take 100 people, 500 over a year, how is that a deterrent?
Well, I mean, what we're doing now is accommodating them here in the UK. Those that are fortunate enough to make this dangerous crossing.
But how is this a deterrent? I mean, if you've got a 1 in 100 chance of being sent to Rwanda, that's not a deterrent. The deterrent is if you said every single person that comes across will go to Rwanda.
It absolutely is a deterrent, because we saw as soon as we announced the policy, for a short time, the channel crossings stopped.
That's because it was bad weather.
Well, there'll always be bad weather, Ian, but this is a deterrent. People are talking about this. It is getting through. This is a policy that is
there were 100 people came over the weekend to Dover, so it's not getting through to them.
But it will do. This is getting a grip of the situation.
So if we send 7 people to Rwanda on this flight tomorrow, and I suspect it won't even be 7, you think that's a deterrent?
I think that when this flight takes off, and the media around it will be great publicity for.
Seriously, what if there are between 1 and 7 people on it? You think the taxpayer is going to think that's value for money to spend tens of thousands on a charter flight to Rwanda with 1 to 7 people on it? Give me a break.
So if you talk value for money, it is costing us hundreds of millions of pounds a day to host people in hotels across the UK, including in Milton Keynes.
I completely accept that.
So the value for money
is a problem that has to be addressed. This doesn't do it, though.
This is addressing it and will addressing it. Successive governments have not addressed this. This government is getting a grip of the situation, taking those tough decisions for the long term. The alternative is to do nothing and to carp on from the sidelines, and that's not what we're doing. We're getting on with it.
Dhesi, would you accept that there is a huge issue here and it is the responsibility of the government to do something? Now, you may not, I suspect you don't agree with this policy, but what's the alternative?
Well, yeah, pleasure to be on your show. And yeah, with regards to the proposal to send people over to Rwanda to ship them off, I think, frankly, is an unethical, unworkable and extortionate policy which will end up costing taxpayers billions of pounds. I think this has been
billions? How do you justify
billions.
that accusation?
I will come on to that. In essence, Ian, it will be cheaper to put somebody up in the Ritz than it would be to ship them off to Rwanda. If we look at the Australian example, from whom Priti Patel and Boris Johnson seem to be getting all their derived knowledge, that policy cost them approximately £5.5 billion. That's working out to be about £1.7 million per refugee. Now, that's why I said it is cheaper to put somebody up in the Ritz than it would be to ship them off to Rwanda. And I think the legal challenges around this, not to mention the unethical nature.
Well, they failed. Legal challenges have failed. The High Court has said, no, this is perfectly okay.
But I think in terms of how this is going to pan out, this is going to be a war of attrition with regards to each individual's human rights, with their lawyers getting involved. And I think ultimately what should be being done, to answer your question, is that the government needs to sit around, work out with the French, rather than being involved in megaphone diplomacy.
They've been doing that for years. It hasn't worked.
But what they've been doing is megaphone diplomacy via Twitter, which has really got the backs of the French up. What that has reduced is the cooperation. And I think
the French have no interest in solving this. I mean, look at it from their point of view. They're quite happy if hundreds of asylum seekers leave their shores and come over here because they don't have to cope with them anymore. They've got no incentive to deal with it.
Not quite, Ian. According to a defence briefing that I received on this issue, it was the fact that approximately 45% of all crossings were actually being stopped by the French prior to
45%. I don't know where that figure comes from.
Well, as I said, that's the briefing that I received.
From whom?
A defence briefing based on
From whom?
I can't disclose it because it was Chatham House rules, but it was because some of us were quite taken aback, and we did confirm not once but twice to say, are you sure that that's what's happening? So in essence, the French have been doing their level best to make sure that they are stopping the boats from actually leaving French shores. But look,
that's exactly the opposite of all the evidence that we've seen from various TV broadcasters that have been tracking how many police officers are sort of sprayed out across the French coast. And Priti Patel has been asking the French government to do much more on this, given them quite a lot of money to help them to do it, with very little effect, apparently.
Not quite. Apparently, all the money did not see its way through. And look, ultimately, Ian, what's involved here is is this the pinnacle of our humaneness in terms of how we are viewed around the world? Is this also how, after what's happened with Australia, and by the way, after 2014, there were no further individuals being shipped off simply because of the unworkable nature of that scheme. And this distraction is to detract people from the actual law-breaking that's been going on under Boris Johnson and Priti Patel's tenure, and not to mention the breaking of the ministerial code, Partygate and everything else.
We don't need to bring that into this. We may have questions on that later. But are you seriously telling me that the Labour policy is to oppose people going to Rwanda but be nice to the French? Is that the extent of it?
No, what I'm saying is that's part of the solution, whereby we need to work, and we also need to ensure, Ian, that there are safe routes. There are that those passages have, in essence, been blocked by the government. So if people cannot make
but at the next
safe
election,
route,
which could come earlier than a lot of people think, depending on what happens on the Standards and Privileges Committee. You're seriously saying we're going to go into the election opposing this policy, but we haven't got one of our own?
No, what we've got is that we will make sure that there's a fair immigration system, that we have those.
Well, let's all have a group hug, shall we? Everyone wants to have a fair immigration system.
It's not about...
How do you bring it about?
Ian, it's not about having group hugs. It's about being sensible, and it's about having solid, thought through proposals, not the wave machines that Priti Patel was referring to in the English Channel, not shipping people off to Ascension Island or to Rwanda. And Rwanda, let us not forget, was a nation that until last year, the government themselves were warning others about. There was a World Report 2020 which highlighted that Rwanda not only had official but also unofficial detention centres whereby refugees and those seeking asylum were being inflicted with torture. So is this really what we want to be doing? We want to be sending people off to Rwanda?
Amma on a text says, Ian, stop being childish and grow up.
She's put it a lot more eloquently than I could ever have done.
I mean, it's not being childish. I'm just trying to get to what the different policies are.
Sonny, you don't have to,
policy. You don't have to come up
French.
with a new policy. But I mean, look, you've been observing these issues for as long as I have. I mean, the government clearly have decided that this is the way to go, whether it's for genuine reasons for thinking, well, it will be a deterrent, or do you suspect that it's one of these things where they're trying to create a wedge and saying, well, look, we're really sorry, but we couldn't actually send anyone because these lefty lawyers have messed it up for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, to be honest, Ian. I mean, look, Ben said that, successive governments have not got a hold of the situation. It's basically Conservative governments. They've been in power for 13 years, and every time they have failed at doing something about this. I remember David Cameron's famous thing that he wanted to keep immigration now to 100,000 a year, and that went nowhere. The fact of the matter is, let's put it this way: if a Ukrainian citizen had been shipped off to Rwanda, there'd be outrage. Why? Because we know why people from Ukraine are coming over here. We have sympathy for them. We're even opening up our homes for them. But if someone from Syria comes, suddenly it's like, oh no, we have to ship them off to Rwanda because there's no option. I mean, that doesn't make sense. We also know there is a civil war in Syria and people are being barrel bombed by Putin there as well. So there is, I think, a double standard, which is where the charge of racism comes here, which is to say, why are we treating Ukrainians differently to Syrians? If these people are being driven out of their homes and they've got nowhere to go, then why aren't we doing something about do it like Germany? Germany took these people in, it trained them up, it gave them jobs, and those people are well integrated into German society. They're contributing to German society, and that's what asylum seekers generally want to do. They want to go to a new place, they want to build a new home, they want to contribute to society. Instead, we're wasting billions sending these people off as a stunt. We know it's a stunt. Everyone knows it's a stunt.
Surely the difference between the Ukrainians, and I hear what you say, but there is a difference, isn't there? Because we've given permission for Ukrainians to come here.
Yeah.
And we have given permissions for Syrians to come here, but they're generally coming from the camps rather than sort of through the Channel route. So you can't quite make that analogy.
Okay, but there is no specific route for asylum seekers to come in. The Refugee Convention says...
Well, there is.
Yes, there
they
is.
can apply in the camps.
Yeah, yes, there is.
And that is happening. I mean, we
20,000 Syrians have been granted asylum.
For like a very tiny amount.
20,000.
20,000.
20,000.
Okay, how many Ukrainians in...
50,000.
50,000, right? And even then, other countries have taken 1 million people each, right? So we are done hardly anything.
So is your beef that we need to take more?
Yeah, I think we should take more, but I also think
it's conflating asylum, and we have many routes of asylum that are specific to people who are in need, who are fleeing genuine war-torn countries, and we have specific routes for them: the Afghans, the Syrians, the Ukrainians, the British nationals overseas who we want to come to.
But we just saw. Now, hold on one second. I remember working with Ian on this whole issue.
No, let's only come back.
But hold on, Ben, one second.
It's
for years, even Ian and I actually campaigned on this whole issue around Afghan interpreters. Do you remember that?
Yeah, long time ago.
We campaigned for Afghan interpreters who were working with British soldiers in Afghanistan to come over here, and this government did nothing about it. And for years, this carried on and even recently when we left Afghanistan in a hurry, there were loads of people left behind. So this idea that we are making it easy for Afghans, even people who we've been working with, is just simply rubbish, to be honest.
Right, let's bring Jo into it. Jo, what do you think?
I just don't like it. I mean, it's not a particularly sophisticated answer, I'm afraid, but it makes me deeply uncomfortable.
You see, I don't think that is a. I mean, you think that's a weak answer. It isn't, because I think that people instinctively do feel uncomfortable about it.
I would
even a
rather
lot
the
of people on the
traffickers are
right.
caught and sent to Rwanda, personally, than the people that are seeking asylum. I think the scumbags that actually prey upon these people.
What have you got against Rwanda?
And make money. But I mean, if we're going to find, but, our prisons are full. If we need to put someone somewhere, then I think we should be looking at that. Actually, we should be dealing with those people that we have failed to deal with for a long time. I mean, it's organised crime on a massive scale. It is organised crime. And it causes deaths.
But why do you think? Look, I've always...
And I personally don't know what we've got against Rwanda. I think, why Rwanda?
That the French authorities, the Belgian authorities, the German authorities, our authorities, they know who exactly these traffickers are. So why don't they arrest them and put them behind bars?
I genuinely do not understand why we have not managed to get a grip on that, because surely if the penalties for those people were that much harsher, would we not actually get closer to dealing with the problem?
So you're saying that's where the deterrence
I think we should go after the criminals, quite frankly. And then, these are nasty people.
Does anyone have an explanation as to why these people traffickers are not being held to account?
Well, part of the problem is that it's a very lucrative industry. People will pay who are desperate, who are leaving, whether it's climate change, whether because their houses are being flooded, or because they're leaving because they're in the middle of a civil war, right? They're going to be desperate enough to pay people to come over here, or anywhere, to be honest. I mean, the UK isn't the only destination. They're going all over Europe. They end up in Lebanon, across other countries. So people will pay. I mean, how are you going to stop that?
Somebody here has said 25% of all those coming in small boats are from Afghanistan. We created the problem. We should own it. Well, it wasn't just us, but is that right? 25% are from Afghanistan? I mean, it's entirely possible, I suppose.
Most of the Syrians across the world are Syrians. Most of the refugees across the world are either Syrians or Afghanis, basically, because their countries are in ruin. I mean, most people don't want to uproot their lives and go somewhere else. They want to stay where they are.
OK, David, thank you very much. Well, it's a very spirited start to our hour. Let's continue with it in a moment, 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 21 minutes past 8 on LBC. With us in the Cross Question studio, Ben Everitt, Conservative MP for Milton Keynes North, Dhesi, Shadow Rail Minister and Labour MP for Slough, political commentator Joe Tanner, and Sonny Hundal, who's Deputy Opinion Editor for The Independent. He never asked me to write anything for them, but there we go. I'll stick to the Daily Telegraph. Right, let's go to our next question. It's Ulf in Hamburg. Hello, Ulf.
Good evening.
Hi.
My question would be, which policy is more likely to succeed? Sending about as many refugees to Rwanda as you're taking from Rwanda, or unilaterally writing an agreement with a partner that is much, much bigger and stronger than you are?
It's not size that counts, Ulf. You're obviously referring to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the tabling of this new bill today by the government. Joe Tanner, let's come to you first.
Oh, gosh, where do you start? It's like pushing water uphill on both, isn't it, really? I mean, I don't know. I think it feels like there is definitely an agenda to shake things up, shall we say. It's one way of putting it. But the Northern Ireland stuff just worries me. It worries me a lot. Growing up in London, travelling around in London and problems with the IRA and bomb threats repeatedly, just in my late teens, I can remember. The idea that we're doing anything that is going to inflame the situation or isn't going to protect the situation just really frightens me.
The interesting thing on that is that all of the parties in Northern Ireland actually agree that there are problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol, don't they? I mean, obviously the DUP would quite like to scrap the whole thing, but even I think they recognise that's not going to happen. But I was listening to an interview with Sinn Féin earlier on, and they fully accepted that it needs to be changed. So you think, well, if everyone's kind of agreed on that, why is this becoming such a huge issue?
Exactly, and the fact that we can't agree on what to do. It is clearly a problem that was kicked down the road, and it was an element of the deal in the first place that was no one was really comfortable with. There was always a kind of what's going to happen next, and we're now at what happens next. And so there is a serious worry about which way this goes, and that delicate balance that we've watched in Northern Ireland for such a long time, and we have the luxury of being able to sit here and watch it rather than living it, as the people over there do. And people with long histories and long problems and families ripped apart by it all, that it scares me. It genuinely scares me.
You were an advisor to Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor. You know Brandon Lewis very well as well. Do you think that the suspicion by some, mainly sort of vehement opponents of the government, that they say, well, this like Rwanda is another one of these wedge issues where they're trying to pick a fight to appeal to their core base? So if you pick a fight with the European Union, that's going to go down well with some people. If you pick a fight over immigration, that's going to go down well with some people. I mean, if so, that would be a fairly cynical approach, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are forces within the Conservative Party that absolutely believe that. Do I think that Boris Johnson wants to do that, or Brandon Lewis? Probably more so would I think Brandon Lewis wants to do that. I'm not sure he would at all. I don't think that's Brandon's style. Whether it's Boris's style, I'm not convinced. Perhaps some people around him might believe that's the way to go. But I think it's a pretty kamikaze approach. And it's a very kamikaze approach with a government that's been in, and a party that's been in government for a long time. Because fundamentally, we're going to approach the next election where a lot of people are going to think, hang on, you've had a long time in, and there's a lot you haven't solved. This could be the time to kick you out. So really, is this just about appealing to the base, if the base, is that right wing these days? Or actually, should we be looking at more centrist policies that are going to get those people that actually aren't that happy with the Labour Party, sorry, Dan, but that actually might be thinking, we might give them a chance still, because, we do identify with some of the stuff that they talk about. So I'm not sure going that far to the right or being kamikaze with stuff that's really important is the right way forward.
Sonny?
I think Joe actually picked up on something quite interesting, which is that actually they do need to still appeal to that Brexit base, because I feel like a lot of them are losing faith in the project. And, Boris Johnson sort of realigned the country in different ways than everyone expected. And in a way, if you do that realignment, the only thing that sort of brings together that realignment, the Tory voting base, is Brexit. And So picking a fight over it, in one sense, from a political sense, makes perfect sense. You want to keep on getting your voters angry. You want to keep on. You need an enemy on a constant basis. You need the opposition. You need to keep on pointing to the opposition and saying these guys, they're in with the EU and all the rest of it. And I think it works politically for Boris. But, as Joe also said, it's a kamikaze approach. If this leads to, Northern Ireland getting annoyed or sort of some of the Republican elements getting coming out again and started threatening violence, then this is going to quickly blow up in our faces. But to me, it is very much a political approach. It's very much trying to play politics with people's lives, and it's dangerous.
Turn to Sai.
Well, Iain, the incredible wit used by your caller, I think, illustrates the farcical situation, unfortunately, that we find ourselves in. I've already outlined the unethical and extortionate nature of the Rwanda policy of this government. And now this thing with basically putting two fingers up to international law, scrapping the Northern Ireland Protocol, which the government themselves signed up for. I remember in 2019, prior to the election, standing up in the chamber, saying to Boris Johnson, look, surely you want to apologise to the DUP over there, you want to apologise to the Northern Ireland people for having sold their interest down the river because you made a promise and now you have reneged on that promise. Your oven-baked Brexit deal, which I would rather refer to as a burnt Brexit deal, will in essence put a customs and regulatory border down the Irish Sea. I was told words to the effect, oh, what a load of codswallop, don't worry, the Honourable Member for Slough doesn't know what he's talking about, it will do nothing of the sort because we need to get Brexit done. Well, now the Prime Minister is prepared to rip up the very deal which he signed, sealed, sold to the British people as his oven-ready deal. And I think this will make us even more of a laughingstock within the international public. And it was also, let us not forget that if this then somehow leads to a potential trade war with the EU at the very time that we are going through a cost of living crisis, when people are having problems putting food on the table, there are issues with regards to businesses going through an excessive amount of red tape. People in Northern Ireland cannot bring over goods from mainland Britain because of the complexities of this protocol and this Brexit deal. So, yeah, all round, it is absolutely farcical. And that's why your caller has hit the nail on the head. They're both extremely bad.
So what would you do about the Northern Ireland Protocol? Be nice to the European Commission as well as the French.
Well, no, look, Labour outlined very, very early on that we needed to take a more cooperative and collaborative approach with the European Union. We didn't agree with this protocol per se, but reluctantly agreed to it.
I mean, my question was facetious, clearly, but it was for a point, to make a point. And the point is that it falls into Boris Johnson's trap, doesn't it? Because he loves to portray Keir Starmer as a sort of EU-loving former shadow Brexit secretary who still opposes Brexit, although Keir Starmer's position now is seemingly very different to that. But if you say, well, we've got to sort of essentially be a lot nicer to the European Union, again, in the red wall seats, which Boris Johnson won at the last election, and it was him rather than the Conservative Party, you're falling into his trap.
Well, I agree with you that this, in essence, is red meat. It's to the Tory base, to the more right-wing elements of that, in order for Boris Johnson to distract from the government's failings. But in essence, the only solution is not about being nice to the EU. It's about doing what is in our national interest, doing what is something that is sensible, because we cannot go about basically sleepwalking into a trade war with our Irish neighbours as well as other European Union neighbours. So that's where I see this.
Ben Everitt.
Well, this is another example of taking tough decisions to fix a problem that needs addressing. And this government is
that going to be your answer to every question?
It depends what you ask, Iain. But this government's not afraid of making these big calls. And Tan has highlighted some of the issues that relate to the Northern Ireland Protocol surrounding the movement of goods, the kind of the dual system that we're running on standards, the fact that people in Northern Ireland, because of the way that the protocol has been implemented, are not accessing some of the benefits of that we are in the rest of the United Kingdom about VAT.
But Northern Ireland's GDP is growing, whereas the rest of the UK it's shrinking. So from that point of view, the protocol is working.
I wouldn't relate the two directly. I'm not entirely sure that.
The reason is that they have access to the single market, and the rest of the UK doesn't.
So what we're planning on doing is simply implementing some changes that more or less are in there anyway, in terms of the trusted trader scheme and the green channel and the red channel for goods going across the Irish Sea. We're not actually doing anything that is particularly profound. We would have preferred to do this by negotiation, and in fact, the door remains open for talks. The EU have not come to the table to talk about how this.
Well, they have come to the table. They just haven't agreed to make the changes.
Yeah.
How does this affect Britain's international reputation? Because for the second time, we're about to break the international law in what Brandon Lewis would call a limited and specific way.
So international treaties get renegotiated all the time.
Yeah, but this isn't a negotiation. This is a unilateral declaration.
It's not working for us, and we're fixing it. So that happens.
And you're
all
happy
the time.
to break international law?
Isn't this something that you negotiated yourself, though? I mean, this was your deal that you're now saying is not working for us.
So yeah, we got Brexit over the line despite all of the opposition in Parliament and elsewhere, and particularly despite the opposition from the European Union, who
did the Prime Minister lie to get this over the line, to get Brexit done?
No.
Well, that's what a lot of people... I mean, you can look at the facts of the matter, and, I mean, there are various statements that he made. So, as Tan said, there will be no border down the middle of the Irish Sea. Well, there clearly is.
But yeah, we got to where we are by doing what we needed to do to get it over the line. It wasn't perfect, but we were limited by all the opposition in Parliament, by people who never really actually admitted that they'd lost the argument on Brexit. And for 4 years... Were campaigning against the will of the people. This is about getting stuff done. It's about unlocking all of those barriers.
Well, it's about slogans, isn't it? That's the problem. And
not really.
Slogans have led to this situation.
Not at all.
But I accept that Brexit got done. But, the fact of the matter is, you said this is our oven-ready deal, and now you're saying, actually, this deal isn't working for us. So which deal...
Yeah, but on the other hand, there are many deals that are done in business or in politics where... on the face of it, they look good at the time, and then when they start to unravel, and therefore the two sides get together and come to an agreement. But here, Sonny, one side has decided that it's not going to come to the table and be as flexible as it needs to be. The EU, I mean.
Well, I mean, you can argue about which side is being inflexible, but the fact of the matter is there's only one side which is saying we're going to unilaterally change the terms of the deal.
That is very true. Can't believe how impartial I'm being on this issue. Nor can you, probably. Right, we will come to more of your questions in a minute. Ulf, really good question. Thank you very much indeed. It's 8:33. Andy Ivey has the LBC News headlines.
Appeal court judges have rejected attempts by campaigners to block the government's plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda tomorrow. The flight will take off as planned, with fewer than a dozen expected to be on board. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has called the policy all wrong. The Irish Prime Minister says the UK government's proposals to change parts of the post-Brexit trade agreement with the EU are a new low. If the bill passes, the Foreign Secretary says it'll make it easier for goods to pass between Britain and Northern Ireland. Kevin Spacey is due to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on Thursday after being charged with sexual offences against 3 men. The allegations against the 62-year-old former Hollywood star date back to 2005, 2008 and 2013 in London and Gloucestershire. LBC weather, a dry night for most. Tomorrow, another fine day with sunny spells and warmer than Monday, a high of 22 degrees.
LBC.
The Sky
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:37. Ben Everitt, Tan Dhesi, Joe Tanner and Sonny Hundal with us. Let's go to another call. It's Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Iain and panel. Yeah, my question is, I live in poverty. How is it right the Chancellor gets £400 to help him with the cost of living, and I don't?
Just explain why you won't, because I think we've talked before about this, haven't we?
Yeah, and I've tried getting help, and I'm just not getting anywhere. Where I live in Stainforth in Doncaster, in the space of a mile and a half of each other, there's 3 mobile home parks, and we're all on gas poles. And we're all on electric.
No, I remember you've spoken about this before. There is a discretionary scheme that each council has got, which the government are funding to, I think, the tune of £500 million. So, I mean, that's the only advice I can give you to apply to that. Sonny, on the face of it, this seems ridiculous that people who are very well off are going to get this £400 as well. I suppose the explanation is, well, that's the easiest way to administer it.
It's a database problem, basically. The government the easiest way to give everyone this money is to basically just give it to everyone without means testing it. If they had a good enough database saying, we know these people deserve it most and it's easy to transfer money to them, then I think they would have done that. I'm not going to criticize it because, to be honest, I do agree that actually not means testing it and making it a universal benefit is probably the best thing to do, to give people money quickly. But, and clearly you are going to have situations like this, which is a shame.
Do you think that there should be a campaign or some sort of publicity campaign, Joe Tan, let's come to you on this because that's your expertise, to encourage people who don't need the £400 to give it to a particular charity or their local food bank? Actually, can food banks accept money? I don't know. Do you think that would be a good thing? Because, I mean, I doubt whether any of us sitting on this panel need the £400.
No, I think there is a.
Obviously, 2 MPs do because they're not very well paid. But
there is an interesting point about this, isn't there? Because if you actually look back at Theresa May's just about managings, the jams, there are actually people for whom that money will be quite crucial because they are managing very fine budgets and they are just about coping. So the issue of where you draw the line is an issue. There's obviously a significant jump when you definitely can draw the line. Surely it is not beyond the wit of man or woman, very clever people in Whitehall, to work out a system where the money can be returned to something or it can go to some fund. Most people are on electronic, internet banking, etc., and should be able, if you've got the money, you don't need it, that you could then return it in some way. Because I could totally understand why taxpayers would say, well, I don't agree with the money that I've paid into the system being paid to some random charity that I don't like. I'm sure if we go back to the hardcore left-wingers or right-wingers, quite frankly, not liking decisions that some people will make about where that money goes. And quite frankly, some charities that it will turn out afterwards, as we've seen before, were dodgy, haven't got the right systems, someone's paid in thinking it was the right thing to do and it's the wrong thing to do. So there'll be an abuse of taxpayers' money in some way. So I don't understand why we can't come up with something, because surely it is as simple as a bank account with a sort code and an account number which you could then return the money to. Now, OK, it might not get everything, but surely it will get a decent chunk back from the people that recognise it's not something they need. Ben
Everitt.
I think that's a really interesting suggestion. I mean, the key here is speed. It's reacting as quickly as possible to get the money to the people who need it. And as Sonny pointed out, we're sort of constrained by the database problem. So a kind of a sort of a flat payment is probably the best way to do it at speed. I recognise the suggestion that Joe's made as a potential thing that could be implemented later. But people are feeling the pinch right now. And with the energy bills are sky high as a result of both the global inflationary pressures and the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So £15 billion rebate is a pretty chunky package at speed, and that is £650 to people who are on universal credit. So that's 8 million households that will benefit from that £650.
And there are actually quite a lot of people, I think millions of people, who will benefit to the tune of over £1,000. So the whole package is a massive package, but there are people, inevitably, that fall through the cracks. However, Martin, somebody on Twitter has some good news for you, but I don't know if this is right. It says, your caller says he can't get £400 is wrong because he lives in a mobile caravan. It's being paid to all properties with an electric meter. So I suppose the difference is your electric meter separate from the main one? And obviously I don't know the answer to that. Tan?
Well, Ian, I think this is where the package needs fine-tuning. That's why Labour, when we propose that we need to help everybody, because everybody is going through the cost of living crisis, but then those that need it most, especially those individuals who receive a homes grant, that should be significantly increased from £140 to £400 as we initially planned. And if we have a windfall tax, and a proper windfall tax rather than the watered-down version, which the government have now come up with, that would have ensured that those most in need would have got a large amount of support. But I'm glad that after 5 months of the Labour Party actually proposing a windfall tax, that the government did eventually copy-paste that policy, although not fully. And
no, because they're raising double the amount that you would have done.
No,
they are. 6 billion. You wanted 3 billion out of it.
No, what we wanted was to make sure that we have a one-off windfall tax which would have ensured that we got at least £600 off everybody else's bill. And that's the key thing here, is to make sure that we had that in place. But because the government delayed for about 5 months, Ian, what that actually meant was that there was at least £50 million added daily to every individual's bill. And that's...
No, I accept they took a long time to get there, but the policy that they've actually implemented is raising far more money than your policy would have, and they are, for people who are most in need, I mean, some people are going to get between £1,200 and £1,400, which again is far more than Labour was proposing.
Sorry, just to clarify on that point, Ian, the Labour Party was proposing more tax on the oil companies, and what the Conservative Party have done is tax them less and borrowed more. So there is a difference.
How come they were going to raise 3 billion and the Conservatives have raised 6 billion?
The Conservatives only put about something like 25% tax on the windfall that the energy companies have had. Labour would have had 35%. So there is a difference in how much they would have taxed the companies. What's happened is that the Conservatives have only taxed the energy companies for about a third of the tax for the actual windfall. The rest of the money is coming from borrowing. Right, and so we're borrowing money.
I just don't follow that, because according to the figures that were published, the windfall tax, although they don't call it that, will raise £6 billion, and Labour said they would raise £3 billion. So something doesn't compute there, if what you're saying is right.
So there is two elements of this windfall tax. One is the money that is coming from oil companies. Another money that is, the second bit is money that's coming from borrowing. The money that's coming from borrowing for the Conservative proposal is much bigger. Right, the Labour Party said we're going to instead not borrow money, but we're just going to tax the oil companies more. That's the difference.
Well, I'm still not quite with you there, but obviously I accept you must be right.
But someone recording this? I don't know if I've ever heard you say
You're
that.
not getting invited back. Right, we're going to move on to the RMT and strikes in a moment. It's 8:46.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
We have now the benefit of Boris Johnson. The flight due to take people to Rwanda. You and your colleague Priti Patel are failing to deport them. They're all having appeals, and there could be fewer than 10 on the plane.
We knew that this policy would attract attacks. There are very active lawyers, as you know, in this field, and I have the utmost respect for the legal profession, but it's also important that we stop criminal gangs.
Is Prince Charles wrong when he says it's appalling? How come you know better than he?
I do think that it's the job of government to stop people breaking the law and to support people who are doing the right thing. That's what we're doing.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
If
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:49, Ben Everitt, Anne Dhesi, Joe Tanner and Sonny Hundal with us. Let's go to the next question. It's a text question from Diane in Harrow. Mick Lynch he's from the RMT, told Nick Ferrari this morning that he couldn't rule out a general strike. Dave Ward told Ian similar a couple of months ago. He's from the CWU. Is it likely, and should Labour support it if it happens? This is nightmare on Downing Street, isn't it, for you, Tan? I mean, this whole talk of strikes and Labour being associated with them. You've had Lisa Nandy, Wes Streeting saying that they support the RMT strike, and now there's talk of general strikes. Where do you stand on that?
Well, nobody wants a strike, whether it's the Labour Party, whether it's the British public, and I think that's why we need the government to make sure that they actually hold strong conversations and strike out a sensible solution, a deal which is there to be had. Now, let's not forget why the likes of the RMT are proposing their strikes. Is because there have been huge cuts to services, about 19,000 services cut. So people are having to wait, rather than catching 4 trains an hour, sometimes they're only catching 1 or 2. And there are further 10% cuts to regional budgets which are being proposed. On top of that, there are proposed cuts to safety and maintenance checks. On top of that, the rail workers that I've been discussing in my role as Shadow Rail Minister, where they've said, look, we've not had a pay rise, most of us, for 2 or 3 years, so something has to give, and now we've got a cost of living crisis, and that's why union members or individuals just generally, if they are not getting a decent wage...
So basically... this will affect people who are being affected by the cost of living crisis because they won't be able to get to work.
It will affect all of us, and that's why we need to make sure that there is a sensible deal thrashed out. And I know that for the last 2 years there have been discussions, and yet there has been no pay increase proposal.
There have been no negotiations. Mick Lynch told me that himself. So they're going to go on strike before negotiations have even started. That's a new tactic. Do you support that?
My understanding is that for the last 2 years there have been discussions, there have been negotiations. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a proposal that has been acceptable, in the sense that people have wanted a decent pay rise. As I said, if somebody hasn't received a pay rise for 2 or 3 years, then no doubt that's going to get their backs up.
You've just trotted out completely the RMT line. Mick Lynch could have been sat there saying all that you've just said. So
I thought Mick Lynch just said that, or according to yourself, Ian, was that there haven't been any negotiations.
No, but he thinks there should be, but he wants to go on strike before they start, which, as I say, is a bit of a new tactic in negotiations, isn't it?
Well, from my understanding, that there have been discussions and negotiations, and now we need to make sure that ministers, rather than constantly trying to save Boris Johnson's job on a daily basis, they should be out there doing their job and negotiating a settlement.
So if you'd been an RMT member, how would you have voted in the strike ballot?
Well, I'm not an RMT member, but if...
No, but you're Labour Shadow Rail Minister. I think our audience would quite like to know, do you support this strike or not?
Well, as I've said, we do not want a strike.
No, I know. But Lisa Nandy has said she supports the strike. This is the democratic
right to strike. We cannot have these laws and proposals by the likes of Conservative ministers whereby they are trying to stop somebody's right to strike. We don't live in a 10-part dictatorship. We live in a democracy whereby everybody has a right to strike.
But do you support this strike?
But we shouldn't be put in that position. We need to make sure that negotiated settlement is arrived at as soon as possible, rather than...
well, we can all agree on that, but do you support this strike? It's a simple question. Lisa Nandy's answered it. Wes Streeting has answered it. Why can't you?
Well, as I said, we don't want the strike.
No, I know that. You've said that 3 times now.
So if there is a strike, then that's their democratic right to engage in that strike. And if
I'm asking is if you would support the strike.
Well, if there is no...
Well, you can't sit on the fence on this. You're Labour Shadow Rail Minister. Either you do support it or you don't.
Ian, as I've said, if there is no negotiated settlement, if there isn't a good proposal, then obviously, we've got no option but individual striking, and then obviously we would have to support that.
So do you not support a strike then? Let me do it the other way around.
As I've said, Ian, we do not want a strike. I don't think anybody wants a strike. We need to be making sure
that 4 times now. I do not understand why, if your colleagues can say unequivocally that they support the strike and you are Labour Shadow Rail Minister, you're prevaricating. You're sitting on the fence.
No, I'm not prevaricating.
You are.
Prevaricating.
I just want a yes or a no answer.
In terms of all these complex issues, what we need to do is to make sure that there's a negotiated settlement. If not, then obviously there will be a strike, and that everybody has a right to strike. And if they are striking, then then if they're not getting a decent wage, then obviously we're supportive of that.
All right, I give up. Ben?
I don't support the strike. I think it's absolutely outrageous. I think that the RMT have timed this to cause maximum pain for rail consumers.
But isn't that what trade unions would do? I mean, if you're going to have a strike, you want to do it at a time when it gives you maximum negotiating advantage.
Well, they're not even negotiating. There's no negotiations. As you've just said, they're just having a strike.
No discussions,
it's absolutely outrageous. This has come at a time when people are really feeling the pinch with the global cost of living crisis, about the global inflationary pressures, the pressures on fuel. This is a real kick in the teeth for commuters and for service users. It will cause absolute chaos, and they're doing it deliberately. The Labour Party need to get a grip on this.
Do you not worry that you've got not just this strike, but Mick Lynch and Dave Ward, two very senior union leaders, both freely talking about the prospect of a general strike? Now, to my mind, we've got echoes of 1979 here, when there was a winter of discontent, inflation was high, unemployment was growing. I mean, admittedly, that isn't happening at the moment. But do you not sort of worry that we might have the next sort of 9 months of very large industrial discontent, which we haven't had for many years, and it's under a Conservative government?
Well, of course I worry about the cost of living. I worry about the impact of that on people, and the government is taking action to deal with that and to address those problems. But these strikes are timed to come at a period when people are really struggling. It's absolutely outrageous here.
Sonny?
I thought there were two funny things that Ben said. The first one was that he said...
laugh.
I was laughing internally, I have to say. Firstly, he said, Labour need to get a grip on this when you're in government, not Labour
The
Party.
unions are their paymasters.
Well, no, that's not true. The unions ignore the Labour...
If it's a general
RMT are not
strike...
affiliated. They haven't been for 20-odd years.
If it's a general strike, unions that fund Labour will be on strike. Would you support them?
I think I've already answered Ian's question.
No, you haven't.
To be fair, you didn't. But
here's a simple point, though, isn't it? If you just said that there is a general cost of living crisis, that people are feeling the pinch, right? If you haven't had a pay rise for 2 years and you're facing 10% inflation, aren't you going to be angry?
Yeah, but if you're somebody on 22,000 a year commuting into London every day, and you look at average members of the RMT being paid £40,000 or £50,000 a year, you're not going to have any sympathy with them at all, are you?
Well, I don't think that's true. I think people would... Hold on. Well, you're making a lot of assumptions for people who work in other jobs, but the fact of the matter is that if you feel like you are being shortchanged by your employer, that you are not getting a pay rise along with inflation, then you're going to be angry at your employer at the very least.
Quick answer for me.
But the thing I like Tan, but the thing that worried me about your answer, was that we've had cuts to services. Well, we're being told daily that no one's going into the office anymore. So of course we're going to start cutting services when people aren't using them. So I don't think, if people stop buying stuff, unfortunately, people lose their jobs, things change, we have to move with the times. If we're not using the services as much and actually things are getting cut, then I don't think that is a good enough reason for people to strike. Now, I appreciate stuff about money, I appreciate stuff about people's standard of living, people being paid a fair amount for their work. But I cannot believe that we're in this year and that we're having conversations about general strikes, that we're having mass transport strikes would just be shocking. And actually, if we are going to get to grips, Tory government to get to grips with something, this is the sort of stuff they really should be focusing on.
Shouldn't we also remember that during the pandemic, not a single rail worker lost their job? £16 billion was put into the rail system to make sure that it could continue to function. Doesn't that need to be part of the equation as well?
But Ian, let us remember that we didn't just do that for the good of the rail workers. We did that for our collective good.
Of course.
For keeping
but it is
workers
a fact that
moving.
Not a single one lost their jobs.
Without those trains, without those buses, without that support, the economy itself would have ground to a halt. And let us not forget that those rail workers and those transport workers were going out there fearlessly during the first lockdown, during the height of the pandemic, as key workers, just as NHS workers. When many of them actually lost their lives, they were out there doing their bit for the country. And that's why I think they deserve a decent wage, and that's why I think the government needs to get a grip and get a negotiator.
Kevin in Oxfordshire is not happy with me. Typical Dale, kick the Labour Party representative around the studio for his own fun. and leave the Tory boy off the hook regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol. Do you feel I let you off the hook, Ben?
Oh, wow.
Well said,
no
that
comment.
Disgraceful public broadcasting, he says.
Well,
honestly. Anyway, let's go on to our final text question. This is from Molly in Keighley. An engineer at Google says their AI system may have its own feelings. I always like to imagine my car is alive. Which inanimate object would you like to bring to life? Who would like to go first? Anyone got a ready-made answer to this?
I'm trying to think of a clean answer to that one.
We've gone past the time ready for that. You're okay, Joe.
Joe, we'll come to you first then. Does it buzz?
Excuse me. I'd say my kettle. I hate that bit where I have to wait for the kettle. You know you want a cup of tea. I'd love for it to have predicted that I'm going to want the cup of tea before.
Wasn't what I was expecting.
Well, I thought I'd raise the tone again.
I would say a pen, because we write so much. I know many people are into typing, but I do write a fair bit, and I think that if the pen could have AI and if it was able to derive its thoughts, that would be absolutely incredible.
Imagine what you might sign up to, though. Yeah.
Maybe a keyboard, though, is with the vigour with which you
Boris
type.
Boris Johnson will blame it on the pen. Right, so we don't want that, actually.
Or blame it on the sunshine or the boogie. Sunny.
Well, probably my fridge, because to be honest, I keep losing track of what's in there, and they keep on promising all these smart fridges which will tell you when you run out of things, but they never appear.
As long as it doesn't discover a sense of smell.
Exactly. I wish you told me that something had gone bad. That would have helped, but sadly, I'd say my fridge, to be honest.
Okay, Ben.
Well, actually, following on from Sonny's fridge, it's the TV remote, because I'd like to be able to ask it where it is. And one time I actually did manage to find it in the fridge. I have no idea what I've been thinking.
That's the menopause, that is.
And this is a person who wants to run the country. Thank you all very much indeed. Very entertaining. Ben, Everitt, Dhesi, Joe Tanner and Sonny Hundal. We'll definitely have you all back, apart from Joe, who was so rude to me at the beginning. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about food security, which is a lot more interesting than it sounds. I promise. 0345 6060 973. Should we be protecting our food security at the expense of the environment? Because that is what the government is accused of in its food security white paper, which was published today. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a last-ditch legal attempt to block the first flight carrying asylum seekers to Rwanda has failed. Fewer than a dozen are due to be on board a plane tomorrow after Court of Appeal judges rejected challenges by refugee charities, which argued the policy is inhumane.